For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Zack Snyder's Justice League? Spoiler, no! But stick around to find out the details. Yeah! Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Wow. Can't believe this is a thing that happened. Can't believe I enjoyed it as much. Well, I can believe I enjoyed it as much as I did, but I had my doubts. Here we've got with this story a chance for this director to take back the movie that was kind of taken from him by both circumstances and then some choices of executives above him. And what we heard would be coming is something that is very different from the original, which was 2 hours long. This one clocks in at 4 hours and 2 minutes. And I think about 85% of the, like 75% of the original was reshoots, was all reshoots. And he didn't use any of the reshot material that Joss Whedon did. So I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that this was, in many ways, a wildly different experience. It felt like, compared to the original movie, someone like rebooting a franchise and saying, yeah, it's the same basic story, but we're going to tell this a very different way. We got a bunch of different scenes. We got scenes that you are familiar with, things that happen that play out in a very different way or a significantly different way. So it's like the same skeleton of the theatrical release is still there, but there's a bunch of stuff that's added and changed, and all for the better, I think, with very, very few exceptions. There's maybe just like one joke that I missed from the Whedon cut that I didn't like that much, but I thought it was kind of a funny little moment. Anyway, I won't say which one. So, synopsis on IMDb reads, determined to ensure Superman's ultimate sacrifice was not in vain, Bruce Wayne aligns forces with Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, with plans to recruit a team of metahumans to protect the world from an approaching threat of catastrophic proportions. The task proves more difficult than Bruce imagined, as each of the recruits must face the demons of their own pasts to transcend that which has held them back, allowing them to come together, finally forming an unprecedented league of heroes. Now united, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Cyborg, and the Flash may be too late to save the planet from Steppenwolf, Desaad, and Darkseid and their dreadful intentions. I watched the teaser trailer that first went out for this, and that was it. I skipped all the other trailers. I ended up finding out that certain characters were in it. But there were some surprises, and so I'm glad I avoided trailers as much as I could, and I'm going to really try and keep this a pretty spoiler-free review as well. But if you just want to avoid all potential hints at anything that might spoil you at all, then I'll just end this part of the review by saying, yes! Go watch it. But stick around, and I'll explain maybe why this movie wouldn't be for you, or why it would be for you. Zack Snyder is a very divisive director. And so your mileage will definitely vary depending on what you think of his movies. So it's 4 hours and 2 minutes long. Let's talk about the story, the script, the pacing, the tone in general. Is this self-indulgent? Well, I don't know. I don't know the man's heart. Does it come across to me as self-indulgent or slow or boring, as at least one review has already said? As far as the self-indulgent part, maybe a little here and there. Like, are there things in the script that strictly don't need to be there in order to advance the story? Yes. But even in the worst-case scenarios, there were still things going on that I thought were interesting. And the next level up from that would be, hey, they're scratching some geek itches that I really enjoy having scratched. And then above that, and this is the this was the case for the vast majority of scenes that were added or different or whatever that, you know, someone might think, oh, are boring or whatever. They helped me to care about either the threat, they were building the ominous feeling of the threat and establishing the threat with that extra time, or helping me care about the characters, their backstories, understanding what drives them so that I better understand what it means for them to succeed or fail at what they are doing. That's what was missing in the Justice League theatrical release. That's what's missing from so many superhero movies that fall short for me, is a sense of the personal stakes for the characters, not just the abstract, oh, the world will be destroyed. We got that. The stakes were huge on a technical, logical standpoint in the theatrical release. It was like, well, if the bad guy wins, that's the end of the world. But did I feel those stakes? No, I didn't. Because I wasn't taken into what it would mean for these characters individually that I'm spending time with here for them to lose. What would it mean for them to lose, to not succeed? And they really give time to that. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted for the Justice League movie. But, you know, I'll say again, your mileage is going to vary, I think, entirely depending on if you like Snyder's quote-unquote cinematic language. James Cameron's been quoted as listing Zack Snyder as one of the filmmakers he thinks are just inventing their own cinematic language. And when I heard that quote, I thought to myself, yeah, that makes sense. Specifically calling it a language, because you can either speak and understand a language or not speak and understand a language, you know. That doesn't mean that, you know, if you don't speak Zack Snyder's cinematic language that you're not sophisticated as a viewer or you're unintelligent or anything like that. I think there are reviewers that will kind of belittle people that don't take the same view as them. But I think that in the case of what Zack Snyder does, first of all, I will say it's a mistake on the part of those who dislike Zack Snyder to say that his work is unintelligent or that what he's doing is just, you know, a waste of time or whatever. If you feel what he intends for you to feel when he is doing visual storytelling, instead of just having characters talk and tell you things, but instead he's showing you things, if you are taking from those visual moments what he wants you to take from them, then you are engaging in the story. You're engaging in it in the same way as you would if you were hearing dialogue being spoken. You understand, like, oh, this is important. They're focusing. Like one simple example, okay, is the Bank Heist thing is still in this movie at the beginning. And I felt like even more time was spent showing the suitcase as the criminals were walking into the bank. And I didn't notice it until like towards the end of that scene. I was like, oh, that's a thing that he's doing on purpose. And it's a very common cinematic device. But I noticed that the time they spent putting in the suitcase made me think about, what's in that suitcase? Oh my gosh. What are they going to do that's going to come out of that's going to have to do with that suitcase? It was building my anticipation. Now, I've seen the movie. I know what's in the suitcase, but I was still wondering. I thought, you know, I thought even crossed my mind, is something different going to be in the suitcase than in the original theatrical cut? I don't know. So much of the movie was reshot. So there are things going on in how the camera focuses on things that are giving me expositional feelings. What that camera shot is saying is, this case is bad news. This suitcase is bad news. That's just one example. Throughout this movie and throughout Zack Snyder's other movies, he's doing things with the camera, focusing on things with the camera, giving time to focus on things with the camera instead of going pop, 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 all over the place, scene to scene to scene to scene to scene, and it's done. He's taking time sometimes to lead us as viewers to ask the question, why is he focusing on this? Maybe we don't know immediately why he's focusing on it. Sometimes we just kind of feel that. We intuitively, we're calibrated for his cinematic language to take from it what we're supposed to. There are also a few times where I wasn't sure why he was focusing on the thing he was focusing on, but that would make me think to myself, why are we looking at this? Why are we focusing on this? And it got me into an attitude of leaning forward and thinking and wondering, and my mind was at work, you know. And so I find myself very mentally engaged, emotionally engaged with Zack Snyder's work because of the way he uses the camera and the way he tells story visually instead of just relying on people talking to each other. Okay, I love the length of this movie. It's 4 hours and 2 minutes, and unless someone watched this in the theater, if they watched it in the theater and it felt too long for them, I think that's a valid criticism because they're in a theater and they just got to sit and watch this thing all in one go, you know? But this movie primarily is going to be seen by people not in the theater. And I think it was made with that knowledge that it's not going to primarily be seen in the theater. It's going to be seen as a home viewing experience, one where the viewer can choose to pause and take a bathroom break or a lunch break or just take a little breather for 5 minutes, or they can watch it in chunks over the course of a week, over the course of several weeks, you know? In fact, this movie is divided up into, I believe it's 6 different chapters or segments or something that each have their own title, part 1, part 2, and it's got a subtitle next to it. So for those who are reviewing it and looking at it from the home viewing experience, unless they are not connecting with the cinematic language aspect, which I think is totally valid, you know, to say I'm not connecting with it, you know, but I mean, like to just criticize it for the runtime, as if minutes itself, you know, can be a benefit or a problem for a movie, I don't think that's valid. The length for this movie actually works for me really well because it keeps the movie fresh, because I'm typically going to want to watch a movie like this in one sitting. It's nice to know that I can divide it up, and it's even kind of broken up in a way that will make it easy to do that, and watch it like in 45 to 50-minute chunks if I want. But I'll probably want to watch it, you know, in one go, and so that means I won't be able to watch it to death. I just won't have time to carve out 4 hours into my schedule very often to have this experience. But also the length itself means that the totality of the story is not really easy for me to digest and keep in my memory. You know, if it's a 90-minute movie and you watch a 90-minute movie twice in a single weekend, then, you know, you've seen, you can remember a lot more of that whole story. But for a 4-hour experience, there's just so much more content, period. And so it's going to stay more fresh to me because each time viewing it through, I mean, over the course of my life, I just won't get as many viewings in of this movie as some other movies that I might, you know, also like. But anyway, so I like that because I hate loving a movie and then watching it so many times that I get to the point where I realize, oh, it's not surprising me anymore. It's not fresh anymore. But these long, beefy movies that I enjoy, I love them all the more for how long they allow me to sit in that world, stay in that world with a storyteller whose techniques I enjoy, and then also not become overly familiar with it, so that I can still have some of that fresh experience. So I watch it how you want. Watch it how you want. 6 parts / chapters, and this is the great world that we live in, with so much of it being really screwed up. This is one nice element of the world we live in, that we are moving from the theaters to a more of a home viewing type experience. Now, we'll see what happens when COVID settles down and people are able to go back to the theater more, but this kind of experience would not be made for the theater because you have to have shorter runtime so people can get they can get in more showings per day in the theater and earn more money that way. But when you're making this kind of project, you can make the runtime as long as you want it to be. And so we can have something here that's a little different. It's like, well, it's not a TV show. It's not really a mini-series. It's kind of divided up. I guess you could watch it that way. It's really long to be like a normal movie. What is this experience? And it's kind of hard to categorize because of the length, because of the way it's divided up. And I think that's really cool because it encourages you to enjoy it on your terms, on your schedule. And that's awesome. I would love to get more experiences like this in general. Now, it's not constant action. In fact, far from it. If you want like a typical rock'em sock'em, lots of action per minute type of superhero experience, then this one is going to disappoint you. But it's still filled, even in the moments where there's not combat or not quote-unquote action, still filled with Snyder's stylistic visual storytelling and lots of non-combat but still very comic booky elements. There's lots of science fiction-y stuff, lots of fantasy stuff going on, and no, it's not in the middle of a combat scene, but you're still dealing with stuff on Themyscira, you're still dealing with weird cyborg stuff and alien technology and stuff. So there's plenty of geek spread liberally all over this movie. Now, what is that extra time used for if it's not used for action? How is, what's going on the rest of the time? Well, it's used to establish and build ominous feelings, as I said earlier, about the looming danger of Darkseid and what it will mean for him to win. This also, by the way, does include some action-packed flashbacks, as you've got a character kind of providing some narration over some really cool backstory flashback type stuff. And yeah, they do explore the backstories of the main characters, their struggles, their motives, and in telling and exploring those backstories, there is some action peppered in there and some spectacle thrown in there as well. Flash gets some really nice added material of the nature that you would expect if you'd seen the first movie, but also there's some scenes with Flash and I'm like, dude, oh my gosh, this is great. Cyborg is the one I think that benefits most from this cut. We really get into his backstory so much more, and also his power levels. I mean, both Cyborg and Flash in this movie, compared to the theatrical cut, are powerful. They cut loose and are capable of some things that I would not have expected that they would go for, you know, in this basically their first appearance, proper appearance in a movie. So it was really neat to see the added material for both of them. Aquaman also gets a little bit of added character treatment. He's played a little bit less as kind of like a bad boy with just kind of the bad attitude or whatever, like, you know, Mr. Cool or whatever, too cool for school, and more like, you know, yeah, he is that grumpy and he's got that, you know, that edgy attitude. But we start to get the sense in this movie that it's because he's a man that doesn't feel like he has a place in the world, and of the options he has to find a place in, he's not really happy with either. And so, like, for example, there's a moment when he's walking on the docks in the theatrical release, and it's featured in the trailer too for the original movie, and like the waves are splashing around and he's walking in slow motion and he's drinking whiskey straight out of a bottle and stuff like that. In the original movie, that's played as like, I'm a bad motorcycle kind of guy, you know. But in this movie, they use a pop music selection there that is much more somber and has a sadness to it, which suggests like, oh no, we're not supposed to be feeling this guy is a cool bad mamma jamma, but instead this is a haunted guy. This is a guy who's kind of hitting rock bottom, and it's not cool that he's drinking whiskey out of the bottle. That's saying he is trying to kind of drink his anger and frustration away, you know. So there's a sadness to that moment. Now, I didn't like the pop song that was chosen there. It didn't make me feel what I wanted to feel, but I could tell from the selection and the lyrics and things like that what it was going for, what mood it was trying to create, and so that I really appreciated. Even Wonder Woman gets a little bit of extra motivation and stuff. There's like a scene where she's fighting Steppenwolf near the end where they added a little bit of dialogue between her and Steppenwolf that really touches to her heart and her motives, and it added drama to that fight scene. And the fight scene got added to also, which was really cool. But the fight scene mattered to me more. The action mattered to me more because of the little exchange between her and Steppenwolf. Did I say Desaad? If I did, I meant to say Steppenwolf. Anyway, there are big moments in this movie that are also seen in the original movie, but they are earned here because of the added cost that is revealed to be associated with those big moments, the cost to the characters as they're trying to do whatever they're trying to do. They're all what they're trying to accomplish in some of those big moments is also recontextualized with bigger stakes or different stakes or just the nature of the threat. Like the ultimate threat that they're up against is much bigger than just kind of like big bad is going to wreck house on planet Earth if we don't stop him, which is kind of what I felt the stakes were in the first one, which, you know, that's big, but it's like, no, we're really looking at a nightmarish hell of an existence for every human on the planet. Not just like the Earth being destroyed, but like, no, the Earth will continue, but it'll be in like a crazy Lovecraftian nightmarish state if the bad guys win. And there are even bigger stakes than that as well, but I won't go beyond that. I won't say anything beyond that. So I really appreciated that of those returning big moments, they were all recontextualized, and I was building in anticipation. I was thinking to myself, you know, even if this plays out, you know, like the thing they're trying to do is still the same thing they're going to do and succeed at, presumably, in this version of the movie, I was feeling it more. I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to succeed? What's going to happen? What's going to happen next? You know, I was just feeling those big moments in a way that I just did not in the original release. And that's really surprising to me, given that I was pretty sure I knew what those big moments were going to be again in this movie. I mentioned that Cyborg and Flash are powerful. Their power sets are really explored in some cool ways. Mera, which is the love interest of Aquaman in the comics, if you're not familiar with the character, she's kind of like the female protagonist or companion or whatever in the Aquaman movie. That's where you would know her more from. But she did appear in the original cut of Justice League, just kind of briefly. And she gets one great new moment I won't spoil, but it was just, and it's in the middle of an action scene. It was an action moment, you know, that I think fans of Mera will enjoy. And so there's just like, it's not just, one fear I had going into this movie was, gosh, it's going to cost a lot of money to do visual effects type stuff. So is all the added stuff that we're gonna get just people sitting around talking? And it is not. So happy to say that that's not the case. Lois and Martha get much appreciated extra screen time in this movie. With nearly every character in this movie, I felt what I wanted to feel in the original cut. Again, because we were allowed to sit and soak in their stories, their feelings, and their experiences. One exception is a new character that's introduced that comic book fans will know who he is, or at least DC Comics fans will. And they don't do much with that character. They actually, I think they could have left him out of the movie entirely, but he seems to be in the movie more to please fans, and then maybe set up his deeper involvement in future stories in the DC universe. I was surprised by the number of jokes that were still in the movie, as well as new jokes. Some of the jokes that I thought were maybe Whedon jokes from the Whedon cut were part of the original cut. Now, there were some jokes that were added. And I did predict pretty accurately, because there'd be times where I wasn't sure, but other times where I'd say, that's a Whedon, that's a Whedon joke, that's a Whedon cut joke. And I think I was pretty much dead on all those that I was feeling confident were Whedon jokes, because they weren't in this movie. But what's funny is the ones that were in the original release and turned out to have been part of Zack Snyder's original filming, as they appeared again in this one, and he said he wasn't going to use a single frame from the reshot material from Joss Whedon. So all this stuff here was stuff he intended to film. Even the jokes that did not land with me before, when they reappeared in this one, they almost all landed with me to varying degrees. Some of them, you know, I just kind of got a mild chuckle. Some of them, they really got a good laugh out of me. And that's in large part because they broke the tension. They broke the tension. A lot of comic relief, quote unquote, in other movies is not comic relief because it's not relieving me from anything. It's supposed to relieve the tension or the seriousness of the main story. But if your main story isn't serious enough, it's not relieving it. It's just a joke that just feels like it's there. And that's why so many jokes in so many superhero movies do not work for me. But here, because of the overall seriousness of the tone, I laughed, I think, at probably 80 to 90% of the jokes, some mild chuckle at least. And part of that's also served by the Flash and how he was fleshed out as this very endearing character, and a fish out of water. I tend to really enjoy fish out of water characters, fish out of water humor, and he certainly is playing that role in this movie. So as far as summarizing the story, this is what I'm spending most of my review talking about. I'm going to talk about some other elements of the movie, but as far as just the story itself and the experience, if you are calibrated for Zack Snyder, you will get, I think, more of what you enjoyed in Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, which in a nutshell I would describe as stylized spectacle and dramatic intensity. But it's at a pace that's somewhere between those DC movies and Watchmen. It's not as kind of like slow moving as Watchmen is, which also had like some cool action beats, but took a lot more time in between those. I'm especially thinking of the Ultimate Cut. It's somewhere between the Ultimate Cut and the frequency of action in Batman vs. Superman. Now, if you disliked Watchmen, Man of Steel, and Batman vs. Superman, if you disliked all three of those movies, well, then I want to ask you to either skip this movie for your own sake, or don't let me hear your complaining for my sake, because you bring it on yourself. If you've watched this review or heard my review now, and you don't like those 3 movies, and you still choose to watch this one, I don't want to hear you complaining. You are bringing it on yourself. You have only yourself to blame. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers for the ending, but I do want to dispel the notion that this movie ends on a cliffhanger. That's been stated by at least IGN and maybe a couple other outlets. This movie ends on a cliffhanger. This movie ends on a cliffhanger. Well, no, not really. Is it completely resolved and tied up in a neat bow? No. But it is a satisfying ending. It completes the story that was the main focus of this whole thing. So it ends in a satisfying way. The heroes have saved the Earth, but there is knowledge that greater danger is likely coming in the future, and we ought to be preparing for that. If you're kind of put off or kind of hesitating, like, oh, I don't like the sound of it ending on a cliffhanger, I'm just setting myself, no, it's not a cliffhanger in the traditional sense, or in the sense that, from which that phrase or word was coined, where they're like literally, oh my gosh, roll credits, It's not that at all. A very satisfying conclusion. I think what's interesting about this movie compared to the original, and as I think about DC movies going forward, is that they could continue forward either treating this movie as canon and ignoring the theatrical cut of Justice League, or treating the original Justice League movie as canon, or writing it in a way. I think this would be a nice middle ground if they're just too nervous about, like, well, I don't know if we want to treat this HBO Max version as canon. I think they could, with just a little bit of clever writing, write going forward from here in a way that allows the viewer to select which movie is in their canon, and it would be consistent with both. So I'm thrilled that even though there was a suit at Warner Brothers that reportedly said this movie is a cul-de-sac that goes nowhere, it's a experience that there is no intention to continue on from here. I don't think there has to be. I think that whatever is put out next, unless it really leans into the Whedon elements, the Whedon plot elements of the original cut, I think that fans will likely easily be able to carry this movie with them as their selected canon going forward. Now, there's also rumors that with the Flash movie, which is modeled after the Flashpoint comic book story, that'll be a soft reboot of the DC universe in the movies anyway, because he's going to do some time-altering type stuff. But either way, I think that you'll likely be able to move forward and treat this as your Justice League in your headcanon, and without really any struggle. So, now as far as the performances go, I want to say that Ray Fisher, who plays Victor Stone or Cyborg, stands out to me when comparing his performance with the original. I connected with his performance much better here. The original cut, and maybe it's because he was feeling like he was phoning it in or struggling with what he was having to do that was different or whatever, but or maybe it's the way he was shot and edited and the takes that were chosen for that cut compared to the takes that were chosen for this cut. Whatever the difference was, I felt watching him that I was watching kind of an actor making actor choices in Justice League, the original, but in this cut, I connected with his performance much more. He still doesn't stand out to me as like, oh wow, this guy is an actor that I really am engaging with, and I feel like his performance is really realistic, and I can feel the pathos of it, or not that kind of thing. But there was nothing about his performance that took me out of the movie and made me feel like he was artificial, as was the case with the first one. Ezra Miller, I want to comment on, because I had issues with his performance in the first one, and that was largely because of what felt like very forced jokes coming from him. Well, as I said, the tone of the overall movie helped a lot of his jokes this time around, really worked for me, and so he also has some added dialogue and some performance opportunities that make me endeared to him. I find him so sweet and endearing, and also a fish out of water. As I said earlier, I love fish out of water characters, and so, this guy who needs friends, which is a line that's still part of this movie, he's very likable to me, and was just, a real treat in this movie. Henry Cavill is not doing the 1950s Superman. He definitely doesn't have the weird lip thing going on, as you would suspect, since those were all Whedon shots. But he's also not doing the 1950s Superman, which, I was pretty confident was a Whedon type of directorial choice anyway. And this is the Superman that we had in Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman. I don't feel like, oh my gosh, he's playing a different character like I did in the theatrical cut. This was a continuation of that same character, and I so appreciated that. All of these characters have distinct personalities that I got to know enough, and I enjoyed their performances. So, yeah, no complaints. All right, so as far as the stunts and visuals, I'm just going to comment briefly on this because I've already said a lot along these lines. It has a 4:3 aspect ratio. If you weren't aware of that, it's not going to be in the widescreen format that fills up your screen. It won't have black bars at the top or bottom. If anything, it'll have black bars on the left and right. I was a little nervous about how boxy and confining that would feel, but actually, I mean, we watched it on, I think our TV room screen is 70 inches maybe, and it did not feel confined or claustrophobic to me, but just be prepared for that going in. I think it helped me knowing, okay, it's going to be 4:3. He did that because his vision for the film was that it be seen best in IMAX theaters. And he still, I think, hopes for it to be shown in IMAX theaters in the future. See, I don't think the length of the movie lends itself to being seen in the theater, but whatever the case may be, I adjusted to the 4:3. It did not feel weird or boxy, really at all. I also wondered, is this movie going to look cheaper? Because it's kind of like made for TV now, right? It's an HBO Max original, and I had reason to hope that the effects would look good because of some, what's it called, Raised by Wolves, which I thought had some really great visual effects in it. And I was not disappointed by the visual effects in this movie. Now, there are still some CG-looking CG moments, but I have an eye that's cursed to pick those out anyway. I felt like the quality and the realism factor of the visual effects was on par or better than the theatrical version of the movie, and the drama really helps me accept CG. If I care about the characters and I'm feeling the stakes, then the CG feels real. It feels like a real threat. It feels like it's really there because I feel like they're really dealing with a threat, There's lots of new visual effects material. There is some reused material, but lots that expands on or entirely adds new visual effects material to the movie. So I didn't feel like this was a skimping, cheap experience at all when it came to the visual effects. So let's see here. Oh, and even the more dramatic parts were engaging because of the Snyder kind of slow motion, his whole cinematic style. Again, your mileage is going to vary depending on how well you connect with and get from his style what he's intending for you to get from it. If you're not picking up on that, you're going to have a hard time with this movie, and it may seem slow and boring to you. I don't know, but I think that's probably, if I were to speculate, why someone would watch a Zack Snyder movie and say that it's boring, because they are not reacting to the storytelling that he's doing in those kind of visual storytelling moments. So let's see here. Oh, I got to talk about the music, which I don't normally talk about. But Junkie XL is now being credited in this movie as, I believe it's Tom Holkenborg. Holkenborg is his last name. It's the first time I've seen him credited by that name instead of Junkie XL. I used to think, because he wrote the music for Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman with Hans Zimmer, or maybe just Batman vs. Superman he co-wrote with Hans Zimmer. This one, he was flying solo, and I was like, oh man, Junkie XL, that sounds like a DJ name. Is it going to be all weird electronic music or something? And I learned before watching this movie that that's not the case, that this guy's a legit composer and may have been responsible for more of the things I really loved about the orchestral stuff going on in those last two movies than I assumed. And so he really made much of this movie for me, made much of what it was. The score is tender, inspiring, epic, edgy. It's just a range of different vibes and feels and styles that all fit within what has been done before. It's more of that. It's more, if you like the score and the level of variation and the different sounds and feelings of previous movies, it just feels like more of that. There are no cheap callbacks to the Danny Elfman Batman theme, as there was, I thought, in the original cut, or the John Williams Superman theme, which was also called back to in that cut. It honors instead the themes and style previously previously co-created with Hans Zimmer. So I think that you will know what to expect and enjoy it if you enjoyed it in the past. There are, as I said earlier, 1 to 2 instances of pop music choices I didn't like, but I appreciated at very least the tone and the ideas that they were going for. Now, as far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Not as strongly in this movie as the past 2 movies. As far as the theme of hope, which was a big, I felt like a forced theme in the theatrical cut, it's still there, but as I wanted in that movie, we're feeling the need for hope rather than being told constantly, boy, the world needs hope. Superman's gone. The world needs hope. No, we were feeling the heaviness of the world in the wake of Superman's death at the beginning of this movie and throughout much of it. And so I really... I think that hope is probably a theme in there somewhere. What's interesting to me is that, if anything, they call back to this idea that Superman is a model for humans, and that they, to be an example to them of what humans can be if they choose to be a force for good in the world, you know. And a lot of people will say that Jesus, that's mainly what he is. He's an example. He's a model for us. And when I would hear that, I would kind of recoil at that a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so much more than that. But as I watched Man of Steel this week, and I noticed that theme again of how Kal-El was the first natural birth on Krypton in like thousands of years, and so therefore was not locked into a pre-genetically determined purpose for his life. He is basically a model for what we can be if we have the ability to choose what we want to be. We can choose to be a force for good. We can choose to be something wonderful. Now, as believers, we know that we can try to choose all we want in this world, but we are in some significant ways broken, and we're needing to be healed and restored to the ideal that God has in mind for us, which Jesus wants to do for us. And so in that sense, Jesus is, especially in his resurrected body, a model of like what humanity is meant to be and can potentially become. But the road to get there is not merely one to just of us trying really hard. We need to be rescued first. And for all the talk in some of these movies and pushing of the theme that like Superman is an example in his behavior, what's also worth recognizing is Superman, first and foremost, saves people's butts from the fire. He gets them out of the horrible danger that they are in. And that is what Jesus has to do for us first, before we can ever eventually hope to become like him. And so we have that consistency, intended or not. We have that consistency, intended or not, in the parallel between Superman in these movies and Jesus, where he is a model for humans as Jesus is. He's an example that we should aspire to follow, but we also need him to rescue us first. And then we can look at him and move forward, looking at him as an example for a potential glorious future in which we become like him, which ultimately will happen when we are given a resurrected life in the way that he has as well. I think probably the more intended theme maybe would be working together. I mean, all these people coming from different backgrounds, and they have their issues that are haunting them, and they have to kind of work through those and find purpose in working together. But, you know, like so many things, there's lots of little moments and phrases here and there throughout this movie, but not a strong, consistent theme that I noticed compared to, say, Man of Steel or even Batman vs. Superman. All right, now I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, okay, well, get HBO Max now. What are you waiting for? Unlike Wonder Woman 1984, this seems better optimized for home theaters. Holly watched the original Justice League with you in the theater, as you know. She likewise was not impressed, but you're going to watch this movie with her. She's not a fan of the comics. She's picked up some Geek from Geek Osmosis living in the house with you, but she's not a fan. But she also valued the character development, and she felt for these characters, some of which she wasn't very familiar with at all. And she felt for all these characters and really enjoyed it. So not only you are going to feel what you're intended to feel in this movie, but your wife, who is not a geek, is going to feel a lot of that too. It's not going to blow your mind, in part because you've seen the original and you can highly suspect a number of main elements that are coming in the story. And it won't move you like Man of Steel did, but it will move you many times throughout the 4-hour experience. And it'll give you some awesome nerd fan moments you didn't get in the theatrical cut. and some captivating spectacle you did not get in the theatrical cut, and in general be exactly what you always wanted that theatrical cut to be. Go watch it, then watch it again, then maybe one more time before the month is over and you let your HBO Max subscription lapse. This one is rated R for violence and some language. I would personally call that a mild R in terms of the violence and language in this movie, but an R nonetheless. Stay tuned for my spoiler-filled reactions, coming first to patrons over at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions and a little later to everyone else. Those are my thoughts. I would love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you'll join me soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.